everybody. Welcome back to Keith and Mike Watch Star Trek Deep Space Nine. We got the cue right this time. I'm so excited. We've got a really great episode to talk about. We are talking about Deep Space Nine Season 1, Episode 7, Dax. Mike, how you doing?
Oh, I'm doing good. I've thanked people in every other show. I'll thank them here. Thanks for those sending out their well wishes as I recovered from the COVID-19. Mostly, you might hear a couple. I'm doing my best to use my cough button so you don't hear me cough all over the show.
So professional.
But I'm feeling good. I had a great night last night. I had so much work to catch up on after the week I had to take off. And what was really nice after a hard day of working was to stay at the computer and watch some Star Trek. And it was great to learn a little bit more about Dax because of all the characters, Keith. I feel like I've had the most questions about the Trill and Dax and what's making her tick, they tick, and I got some of those answers last night. It was cool. I'm excited to talk about it.
Yeah, me too. So we're gonna do our little commercial for our Patreon, but if you're watching, there are chapters below if you don't want to listen to the commercial, especially if you are already one of our patrons, to whom we are immensely grateful. If you would like to join our compatriots, you can go to patreon.com/K&M. That's patreon.com/K&M. Spell out that and Mike, who would they be joining?
Oh, the esteemed colleagues you would be joining are none other than Alan Zimmerman, Jorge Navoa, Cloud Lover 69, Brian Kaufman, and for the briefest of moments, Keith, gaming account who popped into the Patreon and left us some messages and was commenting on all the goodies in there and then popped out. So come on back.
We miss you. Yeah, come on back. Well, and if you were to go there, you'd find some really fun stuff. We talked. Yeah, there it is. We've got some really fun stuff, including Ask Me Anythings. We have some watching Mike watch the episode, which I peeked in on one of them, and I was like, hey, that actually is pretty entertaining.
It's fun.
And it's as if I don't stare at your face enough. I was like, you know what? I might actually watch one of those.
And I have to say, what I've learned, Keith, when we're doing the practice and it's audio only, well, unless you're a patron, which you can watch the show with us.
That's true.
We feel like we have to talk quite a bit to make it because we're talking. But when I'm watching the show and we're kind of watching together, I find that I can let there be some silence and actually enjoy the show and not have to continually jibber jabber. Although don't worry, I jibber jabber quite a bit. In fact, Jen came in, she goes, "Are you talking to people live?" And I said, "No." She's like, "Oh, you're talking to yourself?" And I said, "Yeah."
Yeah, that's definitely true. We have another one. We did a bonus episode of The Next Generation, an important one here to the Deep Space Nine canon, which will be dropping shortly, where both of us get to sort of talk over the episode, which was really fun and enlightening for you, Mike.
Yes.
We met the Cardassians for the first time.
We did, and we got to remember just how look, I love Benjamin Sisko. In fact, this episode, I really love Benjamin Sisko. He's really starting to grow on me, but it's always nice to remember Picard.
A good Jean-Luc Picard.
He doesn't take any shit.
No, it is good stuff. So anyway, join us at patreon.com/K&M. Spell out that and. So with no further ado, I think we should talk more about Dax. Really good early episode of Deep Space Nine, and it aired on Valentine's Day in 1993, Sunday, February 14th, 1993.
How apropos.
Indeed. And it would be a really good song to sing to your Valentine. Still the number one tune, Michael.
And I will always love you.
Dolly Parton's I Will Always Love You, performed by Whitney Houston. The top movie was Groundhog Day. Top movie was Groundhog Day. It's bad. It's bad. But there it was. The headline of the New York Times, I like this one. The headline was actually, Oi Gewalt, New York is an endangered dialect. Was actually, speaking as someone who's lived in New York for 20 years, it's not that endangered. In 1993, we were worried, like, oh, are we going to lose the New York accent? Nope. Don't worry. Still have it. So, the actual episode, this episode was directed by David Carson. Mike, do you remember David Carson?
Yeah, good old the first son of Johnny Carson, late night royalty. Good boy. Good boy.
Yep. None of that's true, but he did direct Emissary, the pilot. So, coming back for another round of Deep Space Nine, this episode was written as a teleplay by Star Trek legend DC Fontana, who wrote 11 episodes of the original series, 22 episodes of the animated series, 5 episodes of Next Generation. This is her only episode of DS9. Now, Mike, do you know why she is listed as DC Fontana as opposed to Dorothy Fontana?
I'm sure it's some sort of a rights or royalty issue, or because maybe it had to do with the fact that she was a female and that wasn't something we were doing. I don't know. That feels not right, but maybe.
It feels not right because it is not morally right. However, you are technically correct because this was back in the 60s, writing for Star Trek. They did not want people to know that a woman wrote that episode, which is egregiously offensive. But fantastic writer, really happy. Part of the lifeblood of Star Trek. And so it's a teleplay by DC Fontana and Peter Allen Fields, who wrote 10 episodes of Deep Space Nine and 3 of Next Generation, with a story by Peter Allen Fields. So now, Mike, are you excited for Trivial Trivia? Excited enough to play the bumper? Let's do it.
I can't wait.
Now, Keith, waste your time with Trivial Trivia.
Okay, so here's
Wait a second. Now that I'm kind of getting into the show, when do we get that episode with Odo like that? That looks awesome.
It's not going to be for a while, but it is awesome.
All right.
So I imagine instead of me playing the piano on that jingle, it's Odo. That's my plan. So anyway, so here is some trivia from this episode. Number 1, there is a replica of the fertility idol from Raiders of the Lost Ark in Dax's quarters. So on her glass display shelf, there is a Raiders idol on that shelf. Hopefully in the screenshots we'll find it. And
not the gavel thing, not that like gavel ball, not that.
No, like the fertility that he steals right in the very beginning. So that's cool. Number 2, the matte painting of Calistron 4 is a reuse of Angel 1 from the Next Generation episode Angel 1, Reduce, Reuse, Recycle. Guest actor Gregory Itzin makes one of his 5 characters in the Star Trek universe. Great actor, used many times. And Mike, I'm sure you recognized him because he also has 5 separate characters on The Practice.
I was like, I know that guy, and I started singing the bumper that you'd know if you watch our other show, but it goes a little something like this. You're not supposed to know this, but you've been on the show before. But now you get twice the residuals knocking at your door. At first you were this guy, then you were this...
We're not supposed to notice that you've been on the show before. But now you get twice the residuals arriving at your door. So welcome back to the
Star Trek.
Deep Space Nine.
I saw you in season 2 and you met your demise.
At first you were an alien, and now you're another alien, and this time you're an alien with something on your face, and you got a little thing and another little thing.
Star Trek.
Deep Space Nine.
We'll have to do a Star Trek version of that bumper. So stupid. It's so loud.
Love it inside joke. Love it inside joke.
Oh my goodness. There's like one person in the universe who watches both shows who's going to be very excited. All right. So our last, and it's not my mother. So the last piece of trivia. I think my mother gets all she needs of us on The Practice. So the last piece of trivial trivia is when Odo says the extradition hearing should take about 30 minutes, we are 30 minutes from the end of the episode.
We love a ticking clock on this show.
Yeah, we do indeed. And that was a fourth wall ticking clock. So now we're going to talk about some guest stars. We have Fiona Flanagan, who also played Data's mother in The Inheritance on The Next Generation, and the Vulcan ambassador on the Enterprise Fallen Hero. So we'd be playing that bumper for her too. And of course, we have Gregory Itzin as Alon Tondro. We have Anne Haney as Renora, and Richard Lineback as Selin Piers, who did an episode of Enterprise as Keswick in The Xindi. So much like The Practice, Star Trek reuses the same actors over and over and over again, which why wouldn't you? Because they can be aliens, right? It's a little more jarring on regular television where you can't put them in a Klingon outfit. All right, so Mike, I think it's time to hop into the viewing room and take a look at this episode. What do you say?
As long as you give me permission, because the last time I went to a different scene, you got very angry at me, so...
You always have permission to go to the right scene.
Okay, fair. Way, there we are.
We did it. All right. So here we are in the teaser of Dax. We find out that O'Brien is off on a trip and everything is breaking down. And we see here Bashir hitting on Dax as always. And we get our first reference to Rokta Gino. So meanwhile, as they're having this weird conversation, a shady dude is staring at Dax through a grate that leads to nowhere. I don't know what's going on. Gregory Itzin is there.
Yeah, what I liked about this is that they're standing up, like, fully erect. So clearly there's just, like, a full-sized cavity directly inside of the bar where you can just sort of perv out.
That's what I'm wondering. Like, what is the purpose of the thing that they're standing in? Is it? Yeah, it's like a little perv cove.
It's a perv cove. Also, question up front, just right away.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe like people really excited about Colin Meaney, and so they were like, "We got to let everybody know he's not in this episode." Right as the first line of the episode.
Well, it's not that. It's a bit of a spoiler because it's a piece of the trivia for next episode, which I've prepped. But you know what? You won't remember. So
No.
Colin Meaney is out for this episode and next because he was filming a movie. And so they needed to explain why he was gone. So that's what they did.
It confused me though, as a viewer, because it really confused me because they were very specific about it. They said he's going to Earth to celebrate his mother's 100th birthday or something.
Mm-hmm.
And then later when we meet the Arbiter, her first line is, "I'm 100 years old." So I started thinking, oh, maybe that's his mom, and it's a whole crossover thing. But no, they just decided to make two people 100.
Well, they were just referencing that people live a lot longer in the future. So, but yeah, no, it was a little shoehorned in there, but fair enough. So, anyway, so here we are in the Perv Cove, and all of a sudden, Dax is confronted by Itzin and two hooded goons.
Never good to have a hood. Never good to have a hood.
Look at that screenshot. Oh my god, that is like the creepiest thing here. Like Dax is literally being abducted, but Bashir's creepier there. So all of a sudden she gets attacked. Bashir takes a very long time to decide to help, but he does get beaten up, and Dax is abducted.
You know what I learned from this scene, Keith?
What did you learn?
Learned that if I'm ever just walking around and I'm being trailed by some goons, if they ask me if I'm Mike Indeglio, best answer, nope.
I don't think you learned that from this scene. I mean, I think you learned that from being Mike Indeglio.
Or living in New York.
Or living in New York. It was like, why are you asking?
Are you so-and-so? Best answer, no.
No, just start with no, and then you can always make it yes later.
Right.
But, yes, instead of yes and, it's yes later. So, so Dax gets full-on abducted at the beginning of the teaser, and we begin with Act 1.
Well, don't
Kira
forget,
and
Bashir gets his ass kicked. That's the other important part
Bashir
here.
does get his ass kicked, although he does stand there for a very long time before deciding to intervene and help.
Yes, and then he decided not to hit a woman, so I guess, okay. Like, I will save you, girl I'm crushing on, unless it's a girl abducting you, in which case, sorry, I'm just going to let myself get beat up.
Apparently. I don't know if that was a choice or just Bashir's not... there are many people on this station that I'd love to have my back in a fist
he's
fight.
not taking a hollow CrossFit, let's put it that way.
I would much rather... Exactly. I'd much rather have Dax on my side than Bashir. Anyway, so Bashir wakes up and calls for help. And Cisco tries to track Dax down, but they left her comm badge with Bashir, which for some reason the sensors in the station, and this has always been like a Trek thing that I don't quite understand. The sensors in the station are like so powerful, they can track people on planets, right? And they can like, oh, it's this person, he's this much old, he's not this race, this whatever. But apparently within your starship, if you just take your communicator off, you're invisible to these sensors.
Yeah.
So like the security is better now than it was then. But whatever. It's symbolic. It's symbolic. So Odo and Kira can't find them. Cisco realizes the technobabble problem that they were having on Ops will prevent them from stopping the ship from leaving that has abducted Dax with a tractor beam. So the tractor beam won't work.
But maybe we can capture them with Keith's favorite technology, the force field.
The force field, they eventually are able to trap Dax and the abductors with said force field.
No way, Keith, with your favorite technology, can they possibly override that and escape anyway?
Oh, you think? Well, little do you know, they've got the little overrider, whatever. But they do escape, but happily, Cisco has fixed the technobabble and get the tractor beam to work. So take that. They eventually come across and grab them. There's the tractor beam, yanking that ship back. They confront him. Here, ooh, good screenshots, Mike. There it is. Itzin explains that he's leading an extradition force arresting Dax for the murder of his father. And we see Dax is super spaced out. So she's being extradited. What do you think here, Mike?
Well, I thought it was interesting and well written that she does not deny it. She, in fact, looks pained. It's very interesting that the performance there is really. What I love is that they don't give her a lot of lines until the back end of the episode, which felt a little mansplainy, but her performance is so powerful because there's a lot of remorse and regret and sort of conflict, which we come to understand why when we get into the intricacies of the trill and what the whole thing is. But I really enjoyed it, and I loved. Well, we'll get to it. I don't want to preempt it, but I love that everybody's rushing to her defense, right? But except her.
Yeah, for sure. So at the beginning of Act 2, we find out through Odo that Kerzon Dax, which was the previous host of Dax, which was Cisco's best friend, the old guy, was charged with the death of the victim, the person, Itzin's father, 30 years ago when he was a Federation mediator. So a couple things we learned there. Well, mainly we learned that Kerzon used to work for the Federation as a mediator. A mediator, not a meteor. He's like flying through space. I'm a Federation meteor. So Cisco says that Kerzon Dax was flawed, but not a murderer. Odo says he's also been charged with treason. And the penalty for murder and treason is death. So we have some stakes going on here. So Cisco goes to Dax to ask what's going on. And Dax, oh my God.
How we doing today, buddy? You feeling okay?
We're doing great. You know, I've been on the mic for like 7,000 years this week. Dax refuses to talk about it or assist in her defense. All right, so it's on this shelf here is the Indiana Jones idol. I think it's down here on the bottom. Let me see if I can
to the right of the
pull it
blue
up.
thing, right?
Yeah. Hold on. There it is. Yeah, I think that's it right there. Let me see if I can point. I point. Oh, I've been cropped. Well, you know what I mean. It's there. So that's cool.
You're not cropped, buddy, just so you know.
Oh, all right, fine. I'm always so salty about like Mike cropping me. For no reason. So we learned from Cisco that he has been friends with Dax for 20 years. But Jadzia reminds him he's been friends with Kerzon for 20 years, but not Jadzia.
This is the start of an interesting arc that I actually didn't really catch until the back end of the episode, but I'll mention it here as we go through, because it's really interesting because the whole time Ben is fighting so hard to save his buddy, right? Because he keeps speaking of this. He hasn't mourned the loss of his friendship because his experience is that it's still ongoing through Jadzia Dax. And the journey he's going to have to go on here, which I find so subtle, and they don't hit you over the head with it, which is I love. It's so, I think, kind of wonderful, is that his defense, all of it is keeping him from recognizing that, because his argument the whole time is she's a whole different person. She's a whole new person. Right. He's not understanding that within the context of his relationship with her, and he has to come to learn that, and he does by the end. And it definitely is a point they're making. It's just a really subtle one, and I like that. This early on in a show, they're willing to have some of these subtextual, more nuanced subplots.
Well, and it's complicated, and it's gray and it's complicated and emotion because you have like, and this whole thing is like you have an emotional relationship, there's a practical, and then you have how does the relationship change? How does your responsibilities change? Your culpability change? And it's teaser for the end. We don't really get a hard answer on that.
They sort of take a back way out, but
and I like that not being necessarily resolved. Anyway, we'll get to it. So back in Cisco's office, Cisco realizes that they tried to secretly abduct Dax because they have an extradition treaty with the Federation and not Bajor. So Kira and Cisco team up and demand an extradition hearing. But I love the sort of relationship that Cisco and Kira have here, being able to sort of tee each other up.
Yeah, feisty Kira comes into play, is helpful in this episode.
And it's also, we see some of the benefits to having our chain of command include people with different responsibilities. Because Cisco is in the Federation, so he's following Federation rules, and sometimes it's handy to have Kira there, not a member of the Federation, but representing Bajoran interests. And that's a layer that we haven't had on Star Trek before. Because Riker doesn't work for the Klingon Empire. Riker's in the Federation. They're all under the same sort of set of rules. So anyway, that's cool. So we head off to Quark's. And Odo tells Quark they need to shut down the bar to hold the hearing. Quark says no, but Odo naturally extorts him with building codes, like he would, as they continue their 7-year flirtation. So, which is odd. You think when you really work your head around the size of this station, right? The square footage of this station, it is absolutely gigantic. And what they said a couple episodes ago, there's only 350 some odd people on this station. So there is a lot of empty space, but the only place...
And you got the hollow suites, and you could just make a whole thing, right? You can make like a whole courtroom in the hollow... You could do a whole bunch... There are options.
Well, that's all right, so this is going to be interesting, Mike. So the hollow suites, do you know how they work?
I mean,
the holodeck / hollow suites.
Apparently not.
So, they have...
I'm only thinking of the one episode where in Next Gen, where Worf is making it with his lady friend, and they're doing a whole like hunting fight sequence in like the jungle. So it seems pretty big to me.
Well, they're able to create environments using force fields to create physical things. So you can walk like a treadmill forever on the holodeck, right? But the size of the room is only the size of the room. So if you and I are both there, if we're treadmilling in the same direction, we can go forever. But if we go in opposite directions, we're eventually going to bump into the wall. And Quark's holosuites are actually much smaller in scale than the ones on the Enterprise. So you couldn't actually fit a whole courtroom of people into it. You could make it look like it was much bigger, but it's actually, Quark's holosuites are only size of like a regular sized room. So you would all be bumping up against the walls in that scenario.
Okay, well, there you go.
Yeah, there it is. So that's why you couldn't. But let's face it, the practical reason is they built Quarks. It's a set. The set's built. We're going to use it. And even if it doesn't quite make sense why they have to shut down a casino to do a courtroom. So Sisko, we see here, sets Odo on the task of investigating the murder back on Klystron 4. So Odo heads off to be private detective.
Could you say
Odo.
he was set off to be Columbodo?
Thank you for watching. Keep in mind, watch Deep Space Nine. No, I actually like that. Oh, God. So the hearing begins, and a 100-year-old, as you mentioned, Bajoran judge shows up. She bangs a round gavel like a Klingon.
So many times they were like, do you see how clever this banging of this thing is? We're going to do it 25 times this episode.
Well, it's funny because the Klingon courtroom had that in Star Trek 6. Of course, when they banged it, there were sparks. So that was really cool. And I don't know why they're like, okay, round ball means gavel in space. But it feels impractical, right? Because bang, 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 I'm so mad. Then what do you do with it? Because you can't just put it back on your desk. It'll roll off. And you'll be adjourned accidentally. So anyway, we begin our courtroom scene, and Sisko makes the argument that the warrant is invalid because it is for Kerzon Dax, not Jadzia Dax. Here's where we get to the whole point of the episode. The judge demands that Itzin prove that Jadzia Dax is legally the same person as Kerzon Dax. And so here we are, basically doing a very similar structure to the Next Generation episode, The Measure of a Man, in which really fantastic episode. We should watch it sometime, Mike. Where they are determining whether Data is a sentient being that has the rights of a real living sentient being, or is he a machine? Is he an object? Does he have personal rights? And it's a very similar dynamic here, establishing, what are the rights, what are the personal rights and responsibilities. Anyway, so Act 3 begins. Sisko sets Bashir to the task of proving medically that Kerzon and Jadzia are different people. He tells Kira to search the Federation records for legal precedent that one Trill host is responsible for the acts of previous hosts. So we have an interesting little legal argument here. And he doesn't really have much of an argument yet. So he's sort of searching around for what he can use.
Yeah, and it's so clever. The writing is backwards because where they're choosing to put the focus, because never is the argument not guilty, right? The argument is not this person. You're accusing the wrong person. That's where they start, because I think, as we'll come to find, I think the more interesting idea that we're toying with is the identity, is a symbiotic being the same, because you have it's almost as if you were reincarnated and had the memories of your past life. Are you culpable for those actions? Right. That's kind of where we start the exploration, but it becomes much more fascinating when we focus in on what are the Trill.
And this is where you get good Star Trek separated from bad Star Trek, right? The whodunit, right? Which is the very basic, which we sort of saw in A Man Alone. Like, did Odo kill this guy? Did he not kill this guy? Which is fine. It's pretty procedural. It's pretty standard fare for television. Like, did he murder him? Did he not? Whatever. But when Star Trek is great, it's about a moral question, not a practical question. And because of the way we talk about these are sort of moral, ethical, existential questions that were like, what is identity? Who is who? When do and liability, culpability? your past. How does your past influence your present and your future? And can you move on? Can you whatever? That's where Star Trek is great. And that's what separates this episode from a standard whodunit. Anyway, love it. So Odo hails from Klystron 4 with news. 1, the murder had big consequences. Back on that planet, the victim was a general in a civil war and became a martyr that turned the tide of the war. And 2, that Kerzon and the general were BFFs. And 3, that general left a widow. So, oh yeah, there's our gavel. It looks like a soccer ball. All right. Anyway, I got behind in my screenshots as I am.
Well, this is where screenshots get a little tough because it's really just like different close-ups of the same 5 people.
Right. Which you'd think would not be compelling television, but we'd think wrong. Oh, so there's our view of Klystron 4, which is a reuse before. So, in a beautiful set they built for this. Odo interviews the widow, and she says that Kerzon didn't do it, but her son won't listen. She says that there was a secret transmission that told the other side of the Civil War when and where the general was traveling. He was ambushed and kidnapped. Her son believes that Dax made that transmission, and he's ruled out all other people because no one else knew where the general was going to be. So we sort of see the structure of the case. And the widow asks how Kerzon is doing and is very upset to find out that Jadzia is now the host of Dax. So she's very upset that Kerzon has died. So we lot of information. Were you able to track all of that the first time? Because I always found that a little.
Sorta. I mean the political plot is pretty understandable, but because, and we come to learn that we're never really given any other suspects, right? So tracking like that, it could have been somebody else, never really entered into the mix because they didn't really propose those pieces. But the piece of information that is important I did get was that she knows something that can turn the tide, but she obviously isn't letting on. And the gratuitous close-ups let us know she knows something. In fact, for a brief moment, I was like, oh, did she kill him?
Well, I mean, certainly that's a fair question at that point in the story.
A fair indeed, Keith.
Fair indeed. Oh, snap. So back at the trial, Itzin calls a Trill expert.
One of my favorite parts.
Who is the guy we saw finger Dax earlier from the Perv Cove. And we find out that his symbiont has survived 7 different hosts. So he's been around for a while. And we learn from this, he has all the thoughts and memories of the previous hosts. So that the new host, i.e. Jadzia, would remember and feel the crimes of the previous hosts. Which is just a really interesting piece of Trill lore. So you're literally walking around with 7 lifetimes of memories, feelings, and experiences that you are experiencing in a new way too, right? Mm-hmm. So you have all the memories, but then when you're incorporating a new host, that host might have a different perspective on all of those feelings and memories.
Well, not only that,
before.
Not only that, but I don't know. I can't speak for most. I feel like sort of empathic a lot. I internalize a lot of people's emotions, and that can be overwhelming. And I recognize at that point, and it's great because we get a follow up later in the episode. That there is a skill set, an emotional and intellectual skill set that the hosts of the species have to sort of prepare for this very reason. And there's an argument made later, we'll get to in a moment, that, well, part of accepting being a host is that you accept the consequences of whatever the previous actions are, which it actually leaves me with more questions, because is there sort of a sit-down like discussion with the symbiote and being like, well, have you murdered anybody? What crimes do I need to know about? Like, it seems like such a prestigious event to be chosen that you would make the assumption that they're kind of above these types of acts, but clearly not. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, and as we continue our journey with Dax, we're going to get more into that.
Well, that also, yes, because she definitely has a more emotive quality to her as a being than this particular. Trill is also refers to the species when they are conjoined.
Yes. So Trill is I think Trill applies to both the symbiote and the host. They're from planet Trill, which has both the symbionts and the hosts, and it's always sort of been that way.
Right. And I guess so, but like there's no different name for people who are potential hosts who don't have the.
No, I believe they're also Trills. If I'm wrong, folks, leave a comment below, because I certainly would love to continue clarifying that. But that is my understanding of it.
But you'll see that this guy who clearly has, and maybe it's a distinction that isn't intended, maybe it's just performance based, but I like that since this is clearly Jadzia's, her youth brings more of a bubbly sort of emotional accessibility to her, whereas this Trill that is interviewed here seems much more centered and sort of emotionally void. I don't want to say emotionally void, but what's the word I'm looking for?
He's sort of Vulcan-ish a little bit. He's not very emotionally connected. Yeah, and there is sort of an element of that where we know that the Dax symbiote is jollier than most of the Trill.
More of a rapscallion as well.
Well, I mean, and a lot of that was Kerzon, but a lot of it, I mean, that's where we're having the actual discussion. Well, was the Kerzon sort of like fallibility?
Yeah, because the writing is great thus far from what I know of the show. Because we're getting into the. I guess this is kind of what we do. It's all.
We're
together.
Supposed to be analyzing it. That's literally our occupation.
As they're making these. When they're making these distinctions, you could make the argument, oh well, clearly Kerzon was the flirtatious one, the womanizer, as is made mention. But let's not forget, what have I been saying for weeks now? Jadzia enjoys all of this attention being thrown her way. She loves flirting with the various different men. She loves flirting with whomever. She enjoys it. So you can't put it all on Kerzon, right?
No, well, I mean, and because the Kerzon that we know, we didn't know the Kerzon host before it joined with Dax. So that could very well be Dax behind the wheel more than Kerzon. We don't. And the
thing is, I think that what we can say is that it's a little from column A, a little from column B. That there's no specific ratio, and I think Bashir mentions that later.
Well, and that's and I think what we found when we talked more about the science is that there's a symbiote, there's Jadzia, but Jadzia Dax is a third point in the triangle, and that is a distinctly separate being than either one of those two. Anyway, blah 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 blah. Where was I? So Itzen makes a decent point. That if Trills aren't responsible for the previous host's crimes, they could get away with any crime just by changing hosts. And then Cisco retorts with another good point, that hosts are separate beings who only join as adults, and they continue to exist with the symbiont. So the hosts don't get put in with the symbiont when they're children. They're fully formed adults before that time.
There's another argument made that they don't actually use as an argument. It comes up for a different point, but it's also that until the host dies, they can't separate them, right? Like
that's right.
So it's not really an escape. You'd have to basically commit suicide.
It would be you'd have to kill your host in order to do that. So it's not exactly getting away with it scot-free. So only the symbiote would be getting away with it. So in Act 4, the judge proposes separating Dax and Jadzia, just like we were saying, and prosecuting Dax only. Bashir explains that the symbiote and the host are genetically independent, but cannot survive without each other. He also explains the brain waves and that Kerzon and Jadzia are different and unique. So it's like they're separate, but you can't separate them. So Itzin gets Bashir to explain that the symbiote and the host have two brains that work independently, and that there's no evidence that the symbiote's brainwaves have changed since joining with the new host. So it really is like two computers that are linked, that are networked together, as opposed to it's very, very complex and very interesting that they're just sort of networking back and forth. So Cisco calls himself to the stand, and he asks Kira to do the questioning. They're a good team.
Mhm.
He explains how different Kerzon was than Jadzia. Kerzon liked booze and ladies very much, but he was not a murderer. He explains that he's just getting to know Jadzia, like the point that you were saying, that their relationship is very young. And he also makes the terrific point, asking the question, why are you so sure it was the symbiont who was the murdering influence? Why not Kerzon? They argue about salt. He makes the metaphor that you have taken salt into water and now they're intertwined.
And Ben Sisko pats himself on the back so hard when he comes up with that salt analogy. I laughed audibly.
There he is. I'm so proud of my.
Oh, he is. His smirk is jumping off the screen. He was like, ha ha!
I did it. Not realizing you very much can re-separate water and salt. Then the judge says that Dax will take the stand, but she continues to say nothing. Then an extra hands Kira a pad saying that Odo is calling rather than just saying it. So I feel like it's like being handed a note, but it's like a pad. I feel like there was like a producer's cousin or something like that wanted to be on the show. Like,
Yeah.
oh, hand him this pad.
They were also
So-
like, we built that really nice set of that lady's apartment, so we got to go back.
We got to go back. So Odo calls, says he's got some bad news. He's tracked down all the communications from the time, and he has discovered that Kerzon was in communication with the general's wife. Were they having an affair? And if so, that is a motive for murder. Which brings us to Act 5. Odo confronts the general's wife. She says that her husband was not the hero he was made out to be when he died. She knows that she can't tell the truth because his martyrdom is important to their people. But she agrees to tell her story. So we are continuing the mystery of what's going on here, which I thought was interesting. The amount that martyrdom plays a role in our society coming out of wars, even if it was not really true.
I found it interesting just as an insider parallel because we've been dealing with a case in our other show, Keith, where it's so important for the wife to stick by the accused killer in the trial just to kind of maintain that image. And here it's very much the same. She has some things she knows and says, but she knows that she's able to, I think, very emotionally astutely recognize how important his martyrdom was and the stakes of what could be potentially rattled if she
Yeah. And thus, as we find out later, like she's really the martyr. She's the one who actually makes the sacrifice in order for the greater good here. Anyway, we'll talk more about that later. She does agree to tell her story.
awesome makeup.
Yeah, cool, right?
Yeah.
It's subtle. Also, when you're doing alien makeup, it's really hard to act under. So anytime you can do something that drastically changes the shape of the face without covering your eyes or your mouth,
The money
that's actually
makers,
doing
yeah.
most of the acting. Yeah, it's clever. Although I do wonder, it must have been difficult to hear with all that nonsense over your ears. So everyone else had to shout in the scenes. So back in the courtroom, Cisco confronts. Back in her place, Cisco confronts Dax with the idea that that Kerzon had an affair with the widow. Dax still does not say what happened. Sisko knows he's going to lose, and Dax tells him to let it happen. Which at this point, I'm fascinated by why Dax would be willing to do that. Because basically Dax is saying, let them kill me.
Yeah, well, we find out later that their sort of moral compass and about promises and all that kind of stuff are different than ours, at least where our society sits on them today, which had me, we'll talk about it, because it had me kind of scratching my head deciding whether I bought it as a plot point, but I have to keep reminding myself, and this is interesting, in a Star Trek thing that I've never, because I haven't been a fan really, I haven't really considered a lot of these things, that these people aren't human, right? And that our whole culture and our moral system and our hierarchy of importance of various things, fidelity, yada, 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 is very much human. Very much, is that universal? No. Once you start expanding, blowing out the universe into many, 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 many societies and beings, what are the universal morals and what are not universal? Yeah, that's a whole.
Well, and I mean, I guess we'll just get into it. Like, I think for the Trill, right? It's not just about morals. You're dealing with a situation where you are trading hosts and all of these lifetimes and stuff like this, like crimes and responsibilities, and more, and also relationships, right? Navigating the sort of semi-immortality. How do you deal? And we're going to get into this a lot in the future, but like, let's say you were married, then your host dies. What's your relationship with your spouse, with the new host?
Yes.
So with all of these things, I would imagine your society would develop very codified rules on how to deal with these things. So your responsibilities, the promises you make, your, like you said, fidelity and duty, and I bet a society like that would have to have some pretty stronger sets of that.
But you know what I found really, really kind of interesting, and we'll talk about it now. We'll reference it later. And I thought very powerful. So you remember in what was the episode with the sort of manhunt game called again?
Captive Pursuit.
Captive Pursuit. In that, it was very clear what the rules were for that species, right?
Right.
The hunt is the most important thing. Dying with honor during the hunt is the most important thing. These are things set in stone. We always do. And there was then the episode was about how do we like bend the different set pieces to adhere to those rules. That was the big thing Colin Meaney discovered, or O'Brien discovered. In this, one of the best parts is we're talking about these intricacies. Obviously, they put a big point of emphasis on promises made, on promises kept that endure, even though when the host changes or the host changes. But she never says, and that final scene which we're about to come up to, she never says, "I had to keep the secret." She knew Jadzia Dax made these decisions based on her intelligence, based on this. She chose
to keep the secret, and you get a sense of the morality of Jadzia Dax, right? Even though there's, the affair itself is sort of an immoral act, her greater sense of morality that like what's better for this society is bigger than just me. And that speaks to sort of that very Star Trekian moral center that Jadzia has. However, in this scene, she does admit that Kerzon did have the affair, and he did love her. So the judge calls the hearing back to order, and Sisko questions Dax on the stand.
Before we exit that scene, though, sorry. I thought that's an important scene because I think it's one where, and she says you have to let me go. It's definitely two-sided because it's also, as we talked about that sort of subtle subplot, it was the first time I think Ben here realizes I do have to let my old friendship go. This is something new, and that has passed.
I'm glad you pointed that out because I think that's very important. That especially in the pilot, right? He's sort of interacting with her as Kerzon in a different outfit, right? And this is him realizing that no, it's not Kerzon. Kerzon is
It's not
gone.
immortality. The trill is not an immortality, right?
Right.
It is.
Right.
It's almost a rebirth in many
It
many
is.
ways.
No, yeah, for sure. And so, and I don't want to give away any spoilers, but like there's some really fascinating continuations of this idea,
great.
as we move forward. But yeah, no, and Deep Space Nine. What makes Deep Space Nine, in my opinion, possibly the best Trek out there, and that's character development, right? We are 7 episodes in, and we are seeing a relationship change, a relationship grow and develop in a way that it didn't really happen on Next Gen. I mean, Next Gen did to some extent, but not nearly as in depth or as far or as fast as it does in this. So, anyway, so Sisko questions Dax. Sisko confirms that the Trill hosts are tested heavily in academics and character before they can be a host. And we find out that Jadzia had quite the career before she was joined. So, which is also part of why I think that joining includes an informed consent from the host. That, yeah, I really want to do this, and I am a full person. I'm an adult. I have done all of these things. Also, it's not really clear in this episode, but we're going to find out later, Mike, that there are very few hosts. Symbionts to hosts. So most Trills never have a symbiont.
I don't know if that was implied or if that's just what I assumed. But a question that still remains for me is, yes, it's clear that you are, as a host, you are chosen, but are you chosen by like a select committee? Are you chosen by the symbiote itself? What is that specific selection process?
Well, we're going to get into it, but I'll give you the cliff notes. It is a committee, and you are rarely chosen by the symbiote. You are chosen by the committee, although there is Dax has an interesting story that is a little different, but we're going to tell it later. So Itzin confirms that Jadzia accepted all of the responsibilities of the host, but we never confirm if she is actually legally responsible for the actions of the previous hosts. So that question was set up, but we never get the real answer to that. Because the widow walks in and she announces that Dax is innocent. And not only that, she is the alibi because they were getting it on when the transmission was sent. Hearing adjourned, boom. Now,
she makes reference to like, she doesn't say who killed him, or
she doesn't say,
explains sort of what happened, but I didn't quite follow it.
Next, so she does not explain it in the courtroom. So right now, all she says is Dax didn't do it. Dax was with me. We were done doing it. So I'm the alibi, which, I mean, certainly is probably enough to end the extradition hearing. It happens real fast. For TV's sake, I would probably like have a little bit longer of a questioning and verifying all of this, but we don't have time.
That is
There's
the
no
thing.
time.
There's no sort of verification, but I guess they're establishing that she does have an alibi.
Well, but also like this is not the trial. This is an extradition
make a
hearing.
point of saying that often.
So this is like that. So this is to whether or not they can take her to trial. So the rules of evidence will be different, the rules of whatever, but that gets resolved very quickly. But it's a good thing because it allows Jadzia and the widow to catch up privately. And this is where we find out what actually happened. Kerzon swore to hide the affair to protect the memory of the general. It wasn't necessarily hiding the affair, and that the general had been the one to betray his people.
Right? Yeah.
So the general was defecting to the rebels and was going to betray his people And the rebels were like, yeah, just tell us where you are. And then they killed him. And that was the impetus for people rising up.
So
it
that's
was
why
Lamarck,
they communicate of like where he was going to be is because he was like, oh, meet me at
meet me at
7-Eleven.
whatever. And they're like, yeah, sure. Then they killed him. And then Lamarck is dead. And then that's what got people going up. So them keeping secret, it was not about hiding the affair. It was about hiding the fact that the general had betrayed his people, but was also the symbol of that got them to rise up and win the war.
See, I misinterpreted that a little bit, and that's an important misinterpretation because, okay, that fixes a problem I had. Because my point was like, I get like Dax's refusal to say any of this. I get it, but it seems like they must really, it's so comical because here, if a politician or somebody has an affair, nobody gives two shits. So I was like, it's so crazy that it would be that important, even for another species, but it's not about that at all. It just so happens that he was seen as a martyr politically.
Listening.
Yeah. All right. That fixes one of my little quibs.
Yeah. So it wasn't about the affair at all. The affair happened to be happening at the same time. The affair actually ends up only being an alibi.
Mm-hmm.
It's not really about that at all. It's about the general, betraying his people. So it was a bit of a bait and switch.
This scene is great.
It's a beautiful scene. That Dax and the woman, they clearly still love each other, but obviously the situation has changed, and so I thought it was really beautifully done. And the last thing that the general's wife says is now go live a long and happy life as Jadzia, which I thought was beautiful, frankly.
Reminded me of Keith and I share a love for the Shawshank Redemption, and it reminds me of Brooks when he says, "Get busy living or get busy dying." And here you go.
No, I thought it was really beautifully done, and beautifully performed.
Yes.
Honestly, by Terry Farrell and Fiona Flanagan. Anne Haney, because there was a lot of subtext and emotion there in a fairly emotionless scene. It was beautifully performed, beautifully written, very well done. All right, so that is the episode. And before we go to the AlamarEmmys, you know what it's time for? It is time for me to get to the right screen. There it is, and do.
And now it's time for Mike Indeglio's Star Trek Vocabulary Quiz.
Okay, Mike, your first vocab. What?
No!
Your first vocab word is Roctagino.
Yes. So I live in Philadelphia, and you can go to Pat Steaks. Pat Steaks is a famous cheesesteak place here. But if it's too crowded, you just go across the street and you rock to Gino's.
Inaccurate. Data in error.
Come on, that's pretty damn good, Keith.
I did. Look, I have done the Pats and Geno's off. I preferred Geno's, actually.
That's what I'm saying. If you're at Pat's and you're like, it's too crowded or it's like just too many onions, you just rock the Geno's.
Yeah, well, okay. There you go. So, now, we have now talked over all the rest of the music. Your vocab question.
What's the actual answer?
Oh, the actual answer, it's Klingon coffee.
Oh, okay.
So, you know, I need to load up just the music because I gave us like a minute and 10 seconds to do 2 words and we barely get through one. So Klingon coffee.
You can't stifle a good pun.
I can't. Wish I could. So Klingon coffee. Rock the Gino. I'm assuming it's extra strong or something, but you're gonna hear that word a lot. So your second word is tractor beam.
Oh, the tractor beam. We know that one. The tractor beam was used like it's used in any alien encounter. It is a beam of energy that can grab you and pull you back in like a big old claw game.
Affirmative.
There you go. All right. Very good. We are 1 for 2. Now it is time to come along home, Mike. To
rubber match.
The
Oh, the only two? We don't get a rubber match? I don't get to like decide. You got to come up with another one.
We talked about this before. We have 176 episodes. There's only so many vocab words. You get 2 an episode.
All right, well, here's one I definitely don't know yet.
Okay, here we are at the AlamarEmmys, and we're going to ask our first question. Mike, did you find any wormholes in the plot?
No, Keith, I did not. I had my one quibble, which was like, why are they so upset about it? Why would they be so upset about an affair? But it turns out that's been answered just by paying a little bit more attention to the episode. And so, no, Keith, are there any that I missed?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think the how quickly it got dismissed and adjourned, I think it wasn't a wormhole. It was like it was probably just a little compressed. I certainly have the episode leaves you with a lot of questions about Trill law, but I think that was intentional. So it wasn't a wormhole. I think it was it was a pretty tight episode, frankly.
Yeah, I mean, the only I found, like, if we're going like superfluous stakes, which they, the ticking clock always, but did we have to make the extraditer the general's son? Like, was that I don't feel like it paid off in any way, but that was the only other thing that was kind of like.
Yeah. I think you're right. It's not a wormhole in the plot. It seems like an extra contrivance that was unnecessary.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like, I from the writing standpoint, you're trying to give Itzan's character stakes, trying to make it urgent for him. But it didn't really pay off.
It sets it up almost. It almost made it like he was going to be an antagonist, and he is, but he's not so much a bad guy because he makes salient points the whole way. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I guess if I'm writing it and you're going to make it family, then you've got to see him work. He has to sort of step out of the lines of his job to get this done.
I guess you could argue he does in the beginning, trying to like circumnavigate the Bajoran extradition treaty or lack thereof.
Yeah, I suppose that's true. I guess maybe that does fix it, Mike. I think
did we close our own wormhole?
I think you closed the wormhole, Mike.
Okay,
well,
we did it.
Done. Well, now let's talk about our favorite moment. Mike, what was your favorite moment from this episode?
So I feel like the final moment is really beautiful between the two characters. I won't even say women, right? Like between Jadzia Dax and
the general's wife.
The general's wife. I found that very beautiful, but that's an emotional beat. I mentioned it at the very top. We talked about it in the middle, so I won't belabor the point. I really find Ben Sisko's journey here to be my favorite. I don't think it's the most important because I learned a lot about the Trill that I really enjoyed, but his journey here is so subtle. And for Avery Brooks, he's very rarely subtle, I'll say.
Yeah.
So to have him play the subplot, I mean, he does punch the wall in that one scene, but that was directed. I just found that subplot to be just confident writing. They didn't have to add it. I don't even know if they even focused on it in any way, but I just found it to be very kind of beautiful. So,
yeah, I did too. I think that watching their relationship grow is really fascinating. Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's going to be what you mentioned, that last scene, the last scene between Anne Haney and Terry Farrell. I thought it was really beautifully written, beautifully acted, gave us, in a lot of ways, a lot more information about the Trill from an emotional standpoint than we learned from all the practical standpoints. That we're like, oh, do you have the memories of the previous host or whatever? Like, she very much had the memories and had the feelings, and that emotional relationship was very present there. So that is very interesting too when you think through all of the lifetimes in the Dax symbiont. How, like you said about sort of being overwhelmed by all the emotions and all the thoughts and feelings, like, wow, to put yourself in Jadzia's shoes, to have that strong feelings about 7 lifetimes, It's got to be a lot going on in the head there. So
Honorable mention to the scene with the other Trill too. I thought that was a really good scene. The information we gleaned from him and the kind of contrasts we could pull between his demeanor and the way he carried himself versus Jadzia Dax.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, we have only one more thing to do, and that is give this episode a rating. And Mike, remind me what we are being rated by.
I'm happy to always remind you of the self-sealing stem bolts, Keith. But at some point, we're going to probably want we're going to need to bring it all home with some sort of a musical cue here.
We probably will, but Mike, I think here you are with an opportunity.
That's true.
Yeah, I don't have to do all the cues. You are every bit the musician as well, sir.
That's true. You're right. I might have to self-seal some notes. Anyway,
how many self-sealing stem bolts?
The only real knock on this episode is sort of let's just insert a Quark Odo scene. Even the Odo Columbo stuff seemed a little shortchanged. I kind of enjoyed Columbodo, but those scenes were a little truncated too. But hey, look, I'm glad we focused on the important stuff, which was the litigation, which I found to be I was joking with Keith before. I find it to be one of the better episodes of The Practice we've seen this season.
That's true. Yep.
And I think it fulfills that. And the confidence, it's what it has that The Practice has lacked a lot this season, Keith, is confidence in the writing. And they didn't even have to resolve. They didn't even resolve the case until the last 30 seconds. And it was still satisfying because the emotional beats and the character development along the way was so important. I have so much more interest in Jadzia Dax now, which I have been lacking. Bashir had some great. His intro moments gave me the comedy that I needed, just enough kind of lightheartedness that I needed. They didn't overstay their welcome with the combat stuff.
Yep.
The ideas that we've talked about. I mean, this conversation we've had for this episode has been my favorite of all the ones we've had because it's like you say all the time, these conceptual quandaries that we didn't really come down anywhere other than realizing what Ben realized is that the Trill are a new entity each time.
Yeah.
And that comes with a lot of ambiguity, a lot of emotional and practical gray area. But guess what? As we learn in therapy, Keith, sometimes just living with the unknown and living with the complicated feelings is the game, right? It's not black and white. That's black and white is an idea. Black and white is an idea, a foolhardy idea of the young.
Yeah.
So I think, Keith, this is my favorite episode of Deep Space Nine. I think conceptually, I enjoyed the Q-less for its irreverency, but this is my favorite episode thus far. I don't want to go crazy because I know I want to leave a little room, but I'm going to give it an 8 point.
Out of 100.
An 88.95 self-sealing stem bolts.
Wow. Yeah. Well, I mean, look, I felt this way about Emissary, right? I want my Star Trek to have 3 elements, right? I want science, I want emotion, and I want relationships, right? And the episodes that are all science are a little cold. The episodes that are all emotion are a little lacking in the science of the science fiction part. And this had all of the elements that I really, really like. And like you, I think our conversation about this, which will be an ongoing conversation, is what I like best about Trek. Is really trying to just chew on these bigger themes, these bigger ideas, these bigger questions, and how they could relate to us in all the ways in which we reinvent ourselves, and how tied should we be to the person we were when we were 20 as opposed to the person we are in our 40s. Like it's an interesting, it's a fascinating question. So I thought it was acted beautifully, it was written beautifully, it was an elegant episode of highbrow television, right? This asked its audience to go on a journey with them and to like keep up and really start to think through these things. Yes, Mike?
Sorry. And the other thing it didn't do is make any of it about sex and about
Right.
her sexual identity or the fact
Right.
that she was a man and now she's not a man. It didn't come up, wasn't
Yeah.
important. Even them sleeping, even the affair wasn't about the affair. It was about
Right.
the love that
Right.
existed before and after, and the scene in the end. There was no weirdness that she was caressing her face and that the love was still there because they were both female. None
Right.
of it.
It didn't matter. Yeah.
It didn't matter. And
Yeah.
that's also ballsy. That's also a lot of confidence.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. We never once even never once even talked about it. But that's what the show shows. Like that's not what we're here for. So anyway, I really like this episode. I think it's one of the strongest episodes of season 1. Although there's one coming up that's a doozy by the end of the season, which is awesome. So I actually wrote down my number of self-sealing stem bolts before you said 88.95, and I wrote down 88. So
There you go.
there it is. We are very much in queue on this. So exciting. I was excited to talk about this one. I'm happy that we did. So next week we will be talking about The Passenger.
Ooh.
So yeah. That's gonna be also interesting to talk about. Okay, we're gonna watch The Passenger. So
Don't know what that means.
well, Mike, we're going to watch The Passenger. You'll understand what that means
I love a
next
tease.
week.
I love a
There
tease.
it is. All right. So anyway, we'd like to thank our patrons who are supporting the show. You can find them at patreon.com/K&M. We are very much appreciative of them. Go there, join up, get all the fun stuff and all the bonus things. And till then, we will see you next week with another episode of Keith and Mike Watch Deep Space Nine. Thank you for watching. Like and subscribe. Thank you for watching K&M Entertainment. If you enjoyed our particular brand of nonsense, please like and subscribe. Or become one of our patrons at patreon.com/K&M.